Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Catalyze Yourself. I'm your host, Gayatri, and today we are stepping into a conversation that many of us try to delay, avoid, or simply power through, and that is our experiences navigating change. Let's name what is often true. Change evokes feelings of discomfort. It can feel like something is being taken away, like the ground is shifting when we are just getting steady. And sometimes we call it inconvenience or disruption. And under all of that, there is an element of resistance to it. And that resistance comes to us from our past experiences, from our habits we've learned to survive, or stories we were told about stability, safety, and success. There are so many times we are taught to hold tight, to keep things predictable. But here's the quiet truth that many of us forget. Change is not the opposite of stability. Change is your pathway to stability. Because if we look closely at it, we will see that growth only takes place in the space of change. It is the place where we release what is no longer working, where we meet the parts of ourselves we have outgrown, where we step into alignment, not because it's easy, but because it's the right next step for us. And that is what today is all about. Not about forcing ourselves to be fearless in the face of change, but learning how to respond with awareness, learning how to stay steady even when life is asking us to shift. And most of all, learning how to meet change not as a thing that throws us off track, but as the space where we come back to our own selves completely and fully. So, in today's episode, we are going to explore what happens in the mind in all of its parts when change arrives. We will talk what the brain is wired to do, what emotion rises to protect, and what our deeper awareness already knows, even when the surface feels shaky. And we'll walk through how we can support ourselves through a change with tools that center us, not separate us from our own humanity. Because yes, change can be hard and it can also be honest, and we can learn how to move through it, not around it. And when we do that, something extraordinary begins to unfold. We become the stability that we crave, that we are waiting for, that we are seeking. And to understand why change feels so hard, even when it's the right move, we have to understand our mind, not just our brain, not just what we think, but the entire system that makes up our mind, our emotion, and our conscious experiences. Because the truth is, we don't just deal with the change in one place. We experience it through all three dimensions of our mind. Our cognition, the thoughts that we have, the stories we tell, the questions we ask, emotion, the feelings that come up, the ones that we name and the ones that we try to avoid. Consciousness, the deeper awareness underneath, including our subconscious and unconscious patterns that often lead the response before we even realize it. So let's walk through each of these so we can see it a little bit more clearly. Cognition is our first interpreter. It tries to make sense of the change. What does this mean? What do I need to know? How do I protect what matters? Cognition wants clarity, logic, and control. It seeks structure. So when change arrives without a plan or moves faster than our brain can process, the mind can start to spiral. Thoughts become cluttered. Doubts get loud, and we try to think our way into safety. But here's the thing. Logic without emotional grounding is not quite able to lead us all the way through. When emotion comes in and rises, sometimes gently, sometimes loudly, all at once, change stirs grief for what is being lost. It could activate fear because of the unknown. And it can also bring up joy and hope if we don't allow those to get buried underneath what feels like uncertainty. And if you've been through with us through our seasons of Catalyze Yourself, you know this. Emotion is not a problem to solve. It is a signal that something meaningful is shifting or needs your attention, so it can be shifted. But when we don't know how to hold what we feel, we end up reacting from the emotion and stay in the feelings of it instead of responding with intention. And this is where consciousness becomes vital, because the deepest part of our mind, the layer that holds our awareness, our intuition, and the quiet knowing underneath all that noise, already senses what change is asking of us. But it is often the most neglected part. Our subconscious holds the beliefs and patterns we did not choose, the ones we absorbed to survive, to belong, to succeed. Our unconscious stores the older, deeper experiences, the ones we may not even remember, but that still shape how safe or unsafe we feel when something happens that is unfamiliar in the now. And when our conscious awareness is what helps us pause, feel, and choose, not just from logic or emotion alone, but from a place that includes all of us, that is when we can start to say, yes, this is uncertain. Yes, I feel fear. And yes, I can move toward it anyway with presence. When all three parts of our mind are in conversation and collaboration, when we are thinking, feeling, and choosing with intention, we are no longer a victim of change, at the mercy of change. We are partnering with it, and we are doing it from within us. If our mind is made up of cognition, emotion, and consciousness, what allows them to communicate is the next element we have to speak about, which is our nervous system. Every signal our brain, our heart, and our consciousness give each other, and every moment we become aware of it, is because our nervous system is letting us know. It's transmitting what's happening across our brain, our heart, and our entire body, and then activates a response that has been stored within its pattern, unless it is given very specific instructions by our mind to change the pattern of response. This is why when change enters, it could be quietly, it could be through a shift in role, it could be a disruption in your routine, or it could be something brand new or unknown. It does not just land in our thoughts, it lands in our body. Neuroscience tells us that our nervous system stores and repeats responses based on our past experiences. And the more often a thought, a feeling, or reaction has occurred, the more likely it becomes a default path, reinforced within your nervous system through the synaptic connections. And you know what your nervous system considers this as? Efficiency. These pathways don't ask if the situation is real or current. They only ask, have you felt this before? So when change occurs and our cognition does not step in to reframe it, when our emotions flood without it being regulated, and when our consciousness is not integrating all the layers of experiences, our nervous system defaults. And that default very often is stress, anxiety. It receives the cue, something is different, something is unfamiliar, something is what I do not know how to handle. And before we've even consciously responded, It has already prepared the body to protect. Adrenaline surges to keep us moving. Cortisol rises to keep us alert. Our breathing shallows, our muscles brace, our mind begins scanning urgently. This is our body doing what it is trained to do, protect us based on what it thinks it remembers. But here's what's powerful. These responses are not permanent. They are practiced. And if they're practiced, they can be repracticed and they can be retrained. So when faced with change or disruption, with a default response that feels like fear, that might just be conditioning. What feels like urgency might just be some inherited memory. And what feels like chaos might actually be a call for us to look inward so we can determine our most effective response. And our most effective response happens in the space we create to listen inward, to notice without judgment the patterns we are living from, and to gently begin asking, does this still serve me? Is this still true? That space, the one that allows the nervous system to slow down enough to be led, that space is your self-reflection. And if you've been with us throughout the season, you know self-reflection is what holds the entire SIRE model together. It's the ecosystem that surrounds the blueprint of conscious leadership and living, allowing self-awareness to deepen, integration to stay connected, inspiration to stay regulated, and regulation to become sustainable, and expression to remain aligned. When nervous system has been trained to default in response to stress, it will need our presence and our determination to create a new pattern of response so that it is able to respond differently. And that is when we activate our practices of halt, rise, and shift, not just as steps to follow, but as a sequence of nervous system repair and recalibration. Halt gives us that early signal that something within us is misaligned, off course, or it is operating from an outdated script. Rise brings regulation and helps us return to the present moment. It could be through our breath, it could be through our senses, or our anchored attention. And shift moves us to take aligned action from our clarity. And this cycle continues with self-reflection so that the next time that any change arrives, our nervous system is not left to guess and just default. It's supported by the practice we've lived. And this is where neuroscience and self-leadership meet, because responding to change is a nervous system event. And when we meet it with intention, we don't just handle change, we grow through it. We built new pathways, new patterns, and a new, more trusting relationship with our own selves. So let's bring this to our body, into the real, into how change first makes itself known. Because for most of us, we don't even realize we're in stress response until we're deep in it. We don't even feel that overwhelm coming. We feel it after it's completely taken over. But the nervous system, it is always signaling. The challenge is we've been trained to override it or ignore the signal because we have so much stimuli coming at us from the outside world. If we are not training ourselves to pay attention to us, we will absolutely miss the signals that we are giving ourselves. And this is why halt becomes essential. It gives us a language for the cues our body and mind has been giving us all along, cues that something needs attention, care, or redirection. Hesitation, the moment we stall, even when we are trying to move. We second guess, we get caught in loops, we shrink from expression or decision. Often, hesitation means the nervous system is bracing for a threat it cannot quite name. Avoidance, the behaviors that look like distraction, delay, or even busyness. But underneath it, they're often a response to anticipated pain or discomfort. When we avoid, it's not because we are lazy. It's because our nervous system is trying to keep us safe. And lack, the perception that there isn't enough love, time, capacity, clarity, energy. Scarcity sharpens the nervous system to take on an offensive or a defensive posture. And lack is nothing but a conditioned lens, more often than the reality of your moment. And then let's go to tiredness, not just physical fatigue, but the depletion that comes from emotional overfunctioning or internal misalignment. When we are tired, our regulation lowers and our old patterns rush in to take over. Halt gives us that pause before we get to the spiral. It is that doorway into awareness, and it's that doorway that is not passive, it is powerful. Because the moment we name what is happening, we start shifting how we relate to it. When we halt, we are positioning ourselves to no longer be swept up in old narratives. We become observers, witness, and that's the beginning of changing our pattern that lasts. If halt is the pause that helps us interpret an old signal, rise is the practice that helps us stabilize the new one. Because the nervous system responds to safety, pattern, and presence. And rise gives us that internal cue, that signal that tells our nervous system we're here, we're safe, and we can now choose differently. Each part of rise plays a distinct role in that recalibration, which starts with recognition, that quiet noticing. The moment we say something shifted in me, my breath changed, my thoughts sped up, my jaw tensed. But regulation, before regulation can happen, we have to see that we have left center. Recognition does not ask us to do anything. It's not asking us to fix it. It's not asking us to solve it. It's asking us to stay aware. And because you're now aware, your intention can now come in. Once you've recognized that we've drifted, intention is that thread that calls us back. We ask, how do I want to move through this? But from a conscious desire to lead ourselves differently versus any other negative reason, habit, pressure. Intention engages our prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that is responsible for regulation, choice, and forward planning. When we name our intention, we are not just thinking about change. We are literally preparing our neurocircuitry to support the change. And now let's move to senses, our physical senses. This is where the nervous system gets the first indicator that default response may not be what is being called for in the moment. When we anchor through our senses, we are physically disrupting the default stress response. When we go, what do I see? What do I hear? Can I feel the ground beneath me? These questions redirect the focus of our nervous system away from fear loops into the body. They engage the body's calming pathways. They tell the nervous system we are not in the past, we are not under threat, we are here, we are in the now, and we are safe. And with rise, we end with the E, our in the moment introspection, our evaluation, where we ask, how am I doing right now? Not in judgment. It's a gentle check-in. Is my energy aligning with my intention? Am I present in my tone, my body, and my breath? Together, these 4 steps in RISE signal something powerful to our nervous system. We are not running old scripts anymore. We are present, we are choosing, and we are safe enough to stay here. Okay, so if HALT disrupts the old signal and RISE helps us regulate and restore our internal state, then what does SHIFT do? SHIFT is where our nervous system starts getting trained to respond differently. This is the point where our nervous system stops just noticing safety and begins to trust it enough to behave differently. This is where SHIFT becomes the training ground for presence. With SHIFT, you have the first stop where you consciously ask yourself to interrupt your pattern before it becomes your demonstrated behavior in real time, in the moment. When we stop, we are reminding our nervous system a new option is here. We pause, and with that, we create space for that presence to start operating. And we highlight, we name what trained your nervous system into your default patterns. Hey, there's a new option. How you operating right now? This is fear. This is me rushing to prove something. This is my pattern of pleasing surfacing again. Highlighting brings the unconscious into the conscious. And what we name, we can now engage with. No longer a mystery. No longer an I don't know. You now know. Neuroscience tells us that naming our emotion reduces its intensity. It is called affective labeling and has been shown to be an effective method to regulate our responses. Highlighting shifts energy from an emotional space back to cognitive space. And then we integrate. This is the decision point. What do I want to carry forward? What belief or energy needs to come with me into this moment? And what do I leave behind? This is where the changed behavior and response is decided, is determined. Integration means we don't just know better, we do different, we move differently. And when we choose that movement with presence, we are now encoding a new association, a new pathway in our nervous system. We are saying this moment going forward will be responded to in a different way, this new way. The default response of fear is no longer valid. This new response of clarity is the accepted response. And once you've integrated, guess what happens? You flow. We step back into the present moment in full alignment with how we have determined to respond. When we are in the flow state, we are in our element, and our nervous system has been regulated, and it is our presence that leads the way forward. And this allows us to walk back into that moment with a steadiness that others can feel and that we can trust, which is what shift ends with, trust. This is what seals the shift, because even when we've done the work, our nervous system will ask, are we sure? Is this safe to keep doing? Is this? And this is where we have to offer it evidence. We trust the shift. We trust the recalibration. We trust that one choice repeated with presence can become a pattern. And in that trust, a new way of being is formed. When shift is practiced consistently, the nervous system doesn't just stop reacting, it begins to feel guided. And that's where transformation becomes sustainable, not just because we want to change, but because our internal system knows how to stay with it now. And here's the moment we often overlook. And again, it's never because it's not important, it's because it's so quiet. It's self-reflection. If shift is where the pattern begins to change, Self-reflection is what allows that change to last. Self-reflection is what allows your blueprint of conscious living and leadership, SIRE, and your practices of halt, rise, and shift to be sustainable and helping you maintain and strengthen your presence. Self-reflection is what surrounds all of it. The ecosystem that makes space for every signal, every insight, every choice to settle into something sustainable. And Neurosystem has a label for this also. It is called consolidation, the process where our brain and nervous system stabilize new pathways, where repetition becomes learning, where presence becomes behavior. In your self-reflective moments, you will recognize without judgment the moments where you moved in a pattern that no longer served you and where you moved in a pattern that is now different and is now serving you now. It might sound like I caught myself before the old pattern took over. I chose honesty, even though comfort would have been a much easier path. I said yes, but this time it came from clarity and not obligation. These moments may seem small, but they are the actual work you do. Because it is in reflection that your system begins to realize this is what safety feels like. This is what self-leadership feels like. This is what change that sticks actually looks like. And in that pause, in that witnessing, something powerful happens. We stop resisting change and we begin to trust it. So what if we start seeing change, not as something to get through, but something to learn from? So what if we see uncertainty not as a threat, but an invitation for curiosity? What if the discomfort isn't a setback, but the formation of new learned behavior and responses that is giving you growth? What if our nervous system, instead of being something we had to override and ignore, was actually our partner that helped us grow with grace? Change at its core is what gives us that opportunity to create sustainability, because what is sustainable is what can adapt to what every new moment requires. And every time we halt, rise, and shift, every time we return to awareness, to inspiration, to regulation, to expression, every time we reflect with intention, we are rewriting the pattern. We are choosing growth. We are rewriting what we even believe is possible. And now, as we come to a close, I want to offer this. Every time you pause, every time you choose presence over pattern, every time you reflect with honesty, not judgment, embrace the fact that you are changing, you are growing. Changes that you face, changes that you make within you are all catalysts for your growth. It is your return to alignment. Change doesn't just happen around us, it is happening through us. It is rewriting our nervous system. In the presence, we practice. In the presence, we make quiet choices, we repeat. And this is the safest place your nervous system can be. And next week, we continue this journey in episode 16, Perceive with Clarity. We'll explore how our perception shapes our reality, not just through what we see, but how we give it meaning, how we filter the world around us. And we'll talk through how we can interrupt unconscious filters and bring in clarity to how we think, feel, and lead. Because sometimes the shift we need isn't what's happening. It is how we are comprehending what is happening. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Gayatri, and I'm grateful for the time we share here every time. And I want to invite you to stay with your growth gently. Let change unfold through your presence. Let your choices reflect the truth of who you are and not who you are trained to be or not what you feel the world expects you to be. And let every breath be a quiet return to your wisdom, your peace, and your power. And until next time, keep honoring your shifts, keep trusting your reflections, and keep leading from the strength that has always been within you.